Globally, India is the sixth largest economy and the third largest electricity producer. It also has the second largest population and fourth largest installed power capacity, which includes third largest the genset capacity. In such scenario, finding the right energy mix will require leveraging the country's existing power plants, removing inadequacies, adding newer technologies, and using flexible power to increase system efficiencies. In these efforts, gas-based power plants have a critical role to play, and it could be a significant part of the country's energy mix. India is a unique country. Creating the right energy mix wouldn't be easy, but with the right strategies and the right technologies, India can chart a unique path to a green economy with sustainable, reliable, clean, and affordable power to all. Today, on this note, you're going to be a part of a live interactive conference on technology edge for power plant performance. Experts from the power and power plant sector will discuss the government's push to increase efficiency in the performance of power plants in India. We will also discuss the advantages, challenges, and opportunities towards implementing technologies to enhance the power plant's efficiency. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and privilege for me to introduce you to our today's distinguished and esteemed panelists, Mr. Ajay Shankar, Distinguished Fellow, TERI, Mr. Kashish Shah, Energy Finance Analyst, IEEFA, Mr. Akilur Rahman, Chief Technology Officer at Hitachi ABB Power Grids India, Mr. Harry Dhol, Director General at IPPAI, and Mr. Rajiv Samant, Chief for Wind O&M at Tata Power. So delegates, get ready for an engaging and interactive session on technology edge for power plants performance.
So let's begin with Mr. Harry. So as the Ministry of Power says, electricity is a critical infrastructure on which the socio-economic development of the country depends. So it is equally imperative to make the power production efficient and productive. So Mr. Harry, what are the key factors that matter or that drive for power plant performance?
Well, I think some basics and some exceptions which are peculiar to India. The lady introduced and mentioned gas. We have almost 8,000 megawatts of gas plants which are ready to go, but they don't have gas. So I would say the first and most important item that we need to look at if you want to run power plants efficiently is availability of fuel. That is a challenge in many ways, and one can spend a long time discussing what those challenges are. The non-availability of fuel or the less availability of fuel or the stress point on fuel or the quality of fuel, that is where the boilers are designed and sized in a certain manner, but the fuel that arrives is different, doesn't exactly fit in. These are some of the challenges on the fuel side. I would also like to touch upon two other points. One is transmission. Of course, to a large extent, transmission seems to have been resolved, but by and large, there are many, many plants which have to back down due to transmission constraints. For example, let's take the case of Karnataka, which has 4,000 megawatts of solar power. And when the solar power comes on, it is a must-run option. Being a must-run option, it means the thermal power plants have to back down. Now, that doesn't really amount to efficiency, does it? When you back down, obviously your fuel consumption goes up and there are all kinds of issues. So transmission is the second point I'd like to touch. The third point I'd like to touch is what really affects efficiency of the power plants is there's very little effort going on, or I would rather say there's more effort required on energy conservation and energy efficiency, which is the third point which I'd like to say, that the power plants in our country are running. They claim to have very high efficiency, but I'm afraid our studies and our exercises in that area say that we need to have a higher level of energy conservation to bring in more efficiency. And to that extent, IPPI in fact had mooted a few years ago a proposal to make energy efficiency, uh, incentivize it in the form of e-certs, which of course the government of India and Bureau of Energy Efficiency took forward. And of course, there's a market available for it, but we are not there yet. So I would like to just stop at this point by saying that these are the three key elements that are very critical in running an efficient power plant at its maximum efficiency, which, as I conclude, means that there needs to be a recalibration on policy and regulation on the interaction, or if you can call it the clash of civilizations, if you like, between renewable and conventional power plants.
Look at this
Thank
topic
you.
from a transition perspective. Uh, Mr. Harry rightly suggested in terms of the efficiency, the problem when you have must-run status with renewables, it's not really efficient for thermal power plants to back down. It's not really efficient. But from what I understand in terms of the target and the objectives that we have, firstly, let's look at the 450 gigawatt by 2030 objective. And then now the increasing conversation about net zero by 2050. IEA has just come out with a big report today on net zero. So keeping aside the debate of what will be India's pathway, if India should think about net zero, but there is definitely merit in transition. So I would emphasize on flexible operation of not just gas-fired power plants, but also coal-fired power plants, and also look at other technology which could provide flexibility and flexible firming power, such as battery storage and potentially green hydrogen as well. And in terms of unlocking investment into these important technologies, time of day pricing is the key policy framework that we need to lay out.
Mr. Ajay, I would like to understand regarding the coal-fired power plants. Coal-fired power plants are considered as one of the major sources of environmental pollution in India. So in this case, what is the current scenario in complying with the emission norms in such power plants? What is the current scenario?
The current scenario as far as, the current scenario is that the Ministry of Environment and Forests had put in place fairly stringent and forward-looking norms some years back. And they were supposed to be mandatory. But for a variety of reasons, forward movement on that has been slow. And the deadlines given by the Ministry of Environment and Forests and Climate Change have been getting pushed forward by a couple of years at a time. And they've again recently been pushed forward. So the environmental norms have, in reality, taken a back seat to the incentives within the power sector for making the plants continue to run and without the investments needed to conform with the environmental laws. So that's a current situation or current reality.
Yeah, I just want to add that I think Mr. Ajay Shankar has really highlighted the point, but more specifically answering the question that you raised. There was a meeting I was invited to attend in the Ministry of Power. We looked at the Supreme Court order, which said that you need to have fluidized gas desulfurization plants in all thermal power plants to reduce the pollution level, etc. And there were all these bankers sitting there, and they all said, yes, 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 sir, we will support this and that and all that. And then when we finished the meeting and we went down and we were waiting for our cars, I was just talking to these bankers. I said, are you really going to finance these power projects? And the answer was absolutely no. I said, but why did you say yes upstairs? He says, because we can't say no to the boss, but you see, the boss will get transferred. And if somebody asks us a few years down the line, why did you finance a stressed sector like the power sector? We won't have an answer to give, and we'll get into trouble with the, with the other agencies, which are, troublesome for bankers. So what I'm trying to say is that The other challenge was that you've already done competitive bidding, you've already offered your price. Now, all of a sudden, a court ruling says you need to have FGDs installed in thermal power plants. If I remember the number correctly, for a 1200 megawatt plant, you were looking at somewhere around 900 crores or 1,000 crores, etc. Uh, it was a challenge to get these bankers to even look at the environment side of it. So, as Mr. Shankar said, specifically speaking, environment is taking a back seat because of multiple reasons. And I think they can be resolved. I mean, this government can resolve it. It's pretty proactive. So let's see how it goes.
As a critical infrastructure segment in the country, it is important for the stakeholders to create a cleaner power producing environment. So in this regard, what technologies and solutions can minimize pollution levels in thermal power plants to make them cleaner and greener?
So here we can talk about, I think, the technologies which are there to really reduce the pollution inside the plant. But also there can be step change in the technology to move into the cleaner energy. And so we are talking about now the carbon neutral future, where including the penetration of more and more renewable energy being used, and also talking about hydrogen power, and also storing the power, for example. So I think these together will definitely lead to a cleaner energy, not only generation but also from transmission point of view and consumption point of view. And we are seeing also increasing use of electric vehicles, for example. So this together, they can definitely lead to a carbon neutral future. Many of the countries, many of the utilities and industries, they have announced that they would like to move into that direction. But it is not just replacing these different conventional fossil-based generation into the new clean energy, but it is also how we have to make the grid working in that, coexisting with different technologies, diverse sources of energy. And here, I think technology can play a big role, and it has been used in power sector since its inception. But here, technology, not only the core technology, but also the automation and digitalization. Together, we have to bring all these different elements together, and also the different stakeholders, from generation to transmission to distribution to consumers and prosumers we are talking about today. I think with this technology platform, we need to work together as a collaborative way of addressing this cleaner energy, and also producing green, transmitting green, and consuming green.
Yeah. So now I'm in midst of all the giants who are sitting, like coal plant, gas plant, and thermal plants. We are the renewables, that is solar and wind. In the last decade, this decade is now going to belong to the renewables. The next thing is this renewables is really bringing a lot of changes to the way how the power is being put into the grid. With the must-run status which has been given to the renewable sector, and now with almost 1 gigawatt, 1 lakh gigawatt of wind and solar into the grid, I hope this power will be assimilated by the sector and we'll be able to become green power in India soon. See, the challenges are we need to admit that when solar and wind is being run in India, we are reducing our dependence on importing the oil, as well as we are also not going to burn coal and create environment hazard. Where we are already seeing what are the hazards of the environment, which we are yesterday only there was a hurricane which happened, a lot of destruction has happened on the west coast. So we all need to have look a sympathetic view to this green power. There are ways by which green power is being promoted by government of India, but there are many challenges also coming to the green power. Also, you must have heard the Supreme Court has come with a ruling. All the 33 kV line network and 220 kV line network which is there in Rajasthan and Gujarat, we need to lay underground. I admit that we might have done it in the haste of doing the projects, but doing this and bringing 33 kV and bringing laying it underground, it's going to be a big challenge. I we know then there should be a way out also. Government of India should support. Ki They just can't live. Otherwise, all these power plants which have been set up, renewable power plants, will become like gas plants. The investor will not be able to sustain. We also need to look at these aspects. And we can't challenge the Supreme Court ruling, but we need to also support how we can do it. These are the challenges which are faced by solar and wind. But one good thing about solar and wind is that really it has picked up and it is really gelling well with the coal and gas and all. I think going ahead, we should already hybrid projects are coming where we can have round the clock power. All the challenges which the other sector is having, maybe I will call my brothers, big brothers, thermal or hydros are facing. Wind and solar are able to meet the challenges. We are able to do forecasting, scheduling of our power. We are able to manage the grid also and give a very steady output which is required by the grid. Finally, the consumer is the king. And you saw the bidding which is happening for both wind and solar. Both are in the range of 2 to 3 rupees. And if this power is going to become so inexpensive, it's going to replace both the coal and the thermal power and the gas. We need now the support of the consumers in doing this. But the technology should be there. The technology for having big turbines, technology where the solar panels are degradation is lower. These are the challenges which I will cover in my renewable operations when it comes. But I think this is a good note. All the sector which is there should support renewables, because going ahead if our goal is going to become zero, then we need to support wind, solar, hybrid, as well as storage battery and all other sources like hydros also.
Have you factored in the cost of storage in that 2 to 3 rupees of solar power and wind power that you talked about? A, and B, how accurate are you going to be in forecasting solar power at night when there is no sun to completely replace coal? Because the impression I got is uh, apparently zero means no solar, no thermal power at all. So I'm just trying to figure out in your mind, what exactly do you have in mind to have a balance between the thermal power plants and the renewables, and instead of just fixing a target of 400 gigawatts, is there a number, or is there a point, or is there a inflection point at which you'd like to strike a balance? Because you will need backup power for any variations in weather, whether it is wind or solar.
Zero coal. It's a zero means I don't think we are saying we want to shut down coal everywhere. It is going to be a co-existence of all the three. Currently, it will be existence of solar plus wind plus your thermal. That can become, that is a good option. But if you go, I will come to the cost part also, but it is the best scenario will be coal, wind plus solar plus battery will be the best way to do it. And if we go for that type of thing, wind plus solar plus battery, the cost may go up to 8 rupees. That is because battery is very costly. But if tomorrow Tesla is able to come with a battery solution where the prices drop, and I don't know when the mass scale. See, Harry ji, if you know, when the solar project first came into India, it was 18 crores per megawatt and 18 rupees per unit. Today, solar is at 5 rupees and at 2 rupees. If tomorrow battery gets regionalized and if that changes everything, we might have batteries which are very cheap, and then we might have this around the clock power, solar plus battery plus wind at around 3 to 4 rupees. Because currently wind plus solar hybrid we are able to do at 3 rupees. And if you actually see, they are complementary. Solar picks from 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and wind is picking in evening. If I put the pattern of how the generation happens, from 7 o'clock in morning to around 3 to 4 o'clock, there is no wind at all. So actually wind blows from evening, from 3 o'clock to morning, say 4, 5 o'clock. So actually wind and solar are complementary to each other. Only we have to have this battery backup, which is in the in between time we are not able to do. If you only leave solar and wind, it will be around to have 85% power can be given. Round the clock power, there was a tender in between, which was won by, I think, Greencore, where they have only, they have done it at around, I think, 6 rupees. Round the clock power, 85% load factor.
The key driver in the whole thought process has to be on how we make the transition to a fossil fuel free electricity system. Now, the roadmap for achieving that is yet a work in progress in every major economy. So it's not that the roadmap for that has been clearly laid out. But as a country, we need to start thinking along those directions and looking at possible pathways. So for the new electricity policy, my suggestion would be that it should enunciate the goal of moving to an electricity system which is free of fossil fuels and an examination of the pathways to achieving that goal. What government has already announced is 450,000 megawatts of renewable power. I think it's expected to come up around 2030 or a few years later. So that is an ambitious enough goal. So we achieve that, and then how do we look forward to making the further transition to 100% fossil fuel electricity system? Because only if we achieve a fossil fuel free electricity system do we then get to a stage where we can seriously start moving to a net carbon zero economy. And given the global situation and the reality of the threat from climate change, I think India needs to be very forward-looking, as it has been till date, in achieving success in mitigation on a planetary scale and restricting global warming to 1.5 degrees. And it's time we, I think, became forward-looking, looked at those trajectories and pathways, and moving away from a more traditional mindset that since we are late in the development path, so we have a natural right to generate more carbon dioxide and we have a right to greater carbon space. Now, in terms of equity, that argument may be right, but in terms of the reality of the world, I think that argument has got dated. And we were one of the first to argue on the per capita principle, which the rest of the world didn't accept. But our per capita principle meant that we would take a low carbon growth trajectory and we make sure that our per capita emission would never cross that of the developed countries. And when they started going down, we would also start going down. So then the logical conclusion of that principle is that when any country achieves net carbon zero, we should also be there plus minus a few years. And I have been personally of the view that we need a serious discussion in the country of how to become net carbon zero in 2047, the 100th year of our independence. I think it's an ambition worth having and thinking through what it would mean. Maybe we will succeed, maybe we will not, but at least we should think about it seriously. This has been a very useful and thought-provoking discussion. We have covered, I think, very many key issues, and the depth to which we have gone and the complexities we have covered has come out very clearly in the exchange between Harry Hall and about storage and its definition and costs and going forward. But what is most, I think, important is that we've got a clear articulation of the major issues that need to be addressed going forward. And the best way of addressing issues going forward is to have discussions of this kind, greater clarity, greater understanding, and also greater debate on the options. So for instance, the point clearly came out that if there is a new plant with a higher fixed cost and there is an old plant with a lower fixed cost, how do we make the transition? Who bears the cost? How is the cost socialized? And similarly, going forward, how do we strategize to move down the cost curve on all the possible options for storage? So we don't put all our eggs in one basket of lithium-ion storage batteries, but also look at solar thermal with storage. We pursue pump storage to the extent the country has possibilities. And going forward, we also recognize that we are a little different from Northern Europe, where they have a lot of wind power round the clock. our wind power availability is a little limited. So the challenges for us in integrating renewables into the grid would come to a higher degree before we reach 45-50% of share of generation. So we have lots of issues to think about, to reflect, and I think getting the policy approach right. Because if we get it right, we can achieve great successes at least costs. And if you look back at the last 10 years, there are two extraordinary successes on which we can take legitimate pride in. One is the breakthrough on renewables. I remember when the National Solar Mission began, the costs were so high, 20,000 megawatts might have now appeared almost impossible. So we've done better than we thought we could do, and we've done it right. And similarly, taking electricity to every household, we've again succeeded, surprising everybody, and at costs which we could bear. So I think if we look at the energy transition seriously now, discuss it seriously, examine the options, costs, etc., I think we'll get it right.
To all our panelists for exchanging their valuable thoughts, experiences, and their expertise on today's topic of technology edge for power plants performance. We hope you have enjoyed this session thoroughly. Before wrapping up today's session, we would like to thank our distinguished panelists, Mr. Ajay Shankar, Mr. Kashish Shah, Mr. Akilur Rahman, Mr. Harry Dhol, and Mr. Rajiv Saman. I would also like to thank Mr. Sudeep for joining us for this session. With this, we would like to announce the closing of today's session. I request you to stay tuned for more such sessions. Until then, thank you, goodbye, and take care.